Brian Ortega is a case study in hyper self-awareness and growth as a martial artist. After taking the first loss of his career against the then 145-pound champion Max Holloway, it seemed from an outside perspective Ortega's life had come to a standstill after such a devastating defeat. He took 20 months off, had multiple surgeries, fired all but one of his coaches, brought in an entirely new team, and took a fight with another elite level striker with devastating power and boxing skill, the number 4 ranked Korean Zombie. What looked like a natural disaster headed straight for T-City on Fight Island quickly showed that not only is Brian Ortega aware of his shortcomings, but he used them to push himself out of his comfort zone, to evolve. Coming into UFC Fight Night Ortega vs. Korean Zombie, the general consensus was that for Ortega to beat Zombie, he would have to be grapple heavy and manipulate the distance at which he fought. Too passive, and Zombie puts Ortega on the back foot, closes the distance and forces his hand, leaving Zombie to land big counter shots and combinations. Too aggressive, and Zombie uses his great takedown defense to force Ortega to stand and trade with deadly consequences. A strategy that Max Holloway used 2 years earlier to school the Torrance native with beautiful combinations and a flurry of attacks. No one has ever questioned the heart of Brian Ortega. The toughness he showed in his first title fight proved to be that of legend, as it took a doctor's stoppage for him to finally cede victory to Max Holloway. His belief in himself has always been one of his greatest strengths, and it's allowed him to remain in fights and ultimately find his way to victory. The only thing left to the imagination was if Brian Ortega had reached his ceiling. Had he gotten as far as his skills would allow him to go? After a 2-year layoff, would there be ring rust, or would he be overly assertive trying to prove to the doubters that he truly was among the elite at 145? During his almost 2-year layoff, Ortega didn't say a lot. He remained mostly out of the spotlight and didn't take a lot of media interviews or really interact with the public much at all. He said during that time he felt disrespected. He felt as if the fans had written him off. Even some of his closest confidants and friends had turned their backs on him. So coming into this fight, we assumed that Brian Ortega T-City was on a mission. Instead, what we saw was a patient Brian Ortega. One not only comfortable standing and striking with the Korean Zombie, but confident in his newly found whip-like jab and agile movement. He continued frustrating Zombie, breaking his rhythm, tagging him with overhands, straights, leg kicks, and then shooting in on the takedown seemingly out of nowhere, just to keep Zombie uncomfortable and thinking about the threats being presented rather than implementing his own. We saw an unpredictable Ortega, drawing reactions out of the Zombie with a variety of feints, threatening takedowns, coming into range and attacking, and then sliding away from danger. Ortega began outclassing the previously thought superior striker, and in doing so set the pace of the fight from the first round on. As Ortega started to settle in, he began to prey on the tendencies of the Zombie, using his aggressive forward-moving style against him with a devastating spinning elbow in the second round, to the point of which Zombie himself admitted was the last moment he remembered of the fight, meaning the South Korean native fought the last 3 rounds of the fight basically on muscle memory and instinct, a human autopilot. That's an insane prospect in its own right, and one of the many traits worthy of praise for the Korean Zombie. While Zombie is among the best in the world at 145 pounds, this version of Brian Ortega was one no one expected and showed he was just a level above. Gone was the one-dimensional Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu heavy approach of Brian Ortega, one that would leave him down on the scorecards in previous fights, needing a highlight finish to secure a win. I think back to his flying knee versus Clay Guida or his late submission victory over Diego Brandao after losing the first 2 rounds in both of those fights. While both are amazing victories, there were glaring holes in Ortega's game, ones that would be exposed at the highest level as we saw in his fight with Max Holloway. But this Ortega, on this night in Fight Island, didn't operate on the hope that his grappling would overcome his flaws. He took the knowledge he gained from those fights, as well as the humbling fight with Holloway, and embraced them, not only opening the door for him to improve his game, but subsequently ripping it off his hinges completely as he showed Korean Zombie and the world he wasn't the same fighter from 2 years ago. From the opening seconds to the end of the 5-round main event, Brian Ortega truly displayed his growth as a mixed martial artist, shattering the pre-fight narrative of being a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu specialist still developing his striking skill. But more than any technique improvements or correcting of bad habits, Brian Ortega showed us his intelligence. Through 2 years of foresight, he saw the holes in his game and ultimately took the steps to improve on his inefficiencies. He showed composure in the face of adversity, where he was plagued by multiple surgeries, a long layoff, a complete revamping of his training team in camp, and the MMA world speculating about his minimal public interaction. Brian Ortega summed up the last 2 years of his reformation over 5 rounds on Fight Island. He has become an MMA practitioner in the truest sense, embracing his weaknesses and making them his strengths. Add in personal growth over that time, and we're left with one simple phrase to describe the new and improved #1 contender at 145 pounds. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the keys to T-City, the evolution of Brian Ortega 2.0.